In this week's Parsha, we're told about a cycle of history that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation, will go through. A cycle of exile, subjugation, enslavement, eventual redemption, falling back into it. And I think there's tremendous insight into our lives, not just as a nation, but as individuals, as parents, as people that influence others, that we can learn from this. And perhaps we can create a little bit of a different paradigm than Freud taught us in the multi-generational relationship, parent-child relationship. One of the Torah giants of the early part of the 20th century was Rabbi Simcha HaKohen of Dvinsk. And he wrote a famous book, a commentary on the Torah called Meshech Chochmah, very important commentary. And he has a classical essay there where he talks about the very natural drive we have as human beings to outshine our parents. We want to outpace them. Not just to outshine them, we want to chart a new path. Our parents did X, we want to do something greater and different, more unique. We don't want to be a newer version of our parents. We don't want to just repeat their lives. We want to do something fundamentally different. And society allows this. If you look at history, for instance, this past summer, my wife and I went with our family, with some family members, to the Tenement Museum in Lower East Side of Manhattan. And you go into the tenement and it shows you an apartment, a very small, very simple apartment that was lived in, first by a Jewish family of immigrants, then by a Hispanic family of immigrants, people from different countries, and shows how they went through the process of coming to the country, the difficulties, and how they overcame them. And I look at this in my family. My grandparents came to the United States in 1922-23. First, my grandfather came, then he brought my grandmother and her children. Then he brought my grandmother and their oldest child. My grandfather had a life in Europe. He came over to the United States when he was nearly 40 years old. But he wanted more opportunity. He wanted the ability to earn a living. He wanted security, not have to worry about pogroms, and what he couldn't imagine at the time was the Holocaust. But he wanted security. He came, and he lived a very simple life. He was a house painter, despite the fact that he had an education that far surpassed that. He earned his living as a house painter. He lived in a simple apartment his entire life, did not travel much, didn't do much. Put his children through public school, gave them a public school education, sent them to city college, and started them on life. My great uncle was a little more successful. He sent his son, the first generation American, to NYU Law School, and he became a world famous attorney. So you see that coming to the United States, having very little, earning a living, getting your children to develop an education, and maybe if you're lucky, they became a doctor or a lawyer. You're not as lucky, they earned maybe a more simple, more modest way of earning a living. The next generation did better. Next generation maybe did not suffice with medicine or law. They went into investments. They went into wealth management, hedge funds. The next generation looked for something different, leveraging technology, something that had been unimaginable 40, 50 years ago. The next generation is leveraging social media. And it's not always about more wealth. In fact, this generation, we're told, is poised to actually earn less than their parents, which is the first time we're finding such an experience in a number of generations. It's not all about money. It's about charting a new path. And as Jews, we have that natural desire as well. And Rabbi Simcha points out that there's a cycle in history. The cycle is Jews are exiled from a country. They come to a new country, and they've got to establish themselves materially, economically, socially, and spiritually. Very modest beginnings. Much as like when the Jews came over from Eastern Europe, a tattered group of survivors, whether they came before the war, poverty-stricken, whether they came as survivors of the Holocaust, they come over to the United States and they have to start rebuilding. And rebuilding spiritually means maybe the first generation doesn't get a Jewish education, but they get a feeling for Judaism. Next generation gets a Jewish education. The next generation really becomes great scholars. My father had no Jewish education. He gave us a Jewish education. Hopefully our children will be much more learned and much more proficient in the Judaism than we are. That's the development. Eventually you reach a point, though, where you feel like there's a ceiling that can't be broken. See, when it comes to socioeconomic living in the world out there, there's no glass ceiling that can't be broken. You're a first-generation American, you get your education, you give your children more opportunity, they keep on going further up, whether it's politically, whether it's with wealth management, whether it's making a difference in the world. But in Judaism, there's a limit. See, when there was a Beis HaMikdash, when there was a temple in Jerusalem, there was no limit. Each generation had their Sanhedrin, their high court. They reached a deep level of Torah. They could reach their halachic rulings. They had prophets that charted new paths from communication from God, communication from Hashem, gave them a whole new mystical understanding. There was no ceiling. Today we don't have prophets communicating from God directly. Today we don't have the ability to overturn rulings of previous generations. The Mishnah and the Talmud are sealed documents. We can't argue with them. Even later sources. So eventually there's a danger that, sure, the first generation is completely unknowledgeable. They maybe know a little bit about Jewish practice. The next generation starts studying Torah. The generation after that become rabbis and very proficient. But eventually you reach a point where it feels almost saturated. And ironically enough, in our generation we see two parts. We see a duality going on. On the one hand, we see tremendous scholarship. I know even from when I was a child to today, the amount of books that have been written on Torah, commentaries explaining obscure concepts that the last generation didn't even have the headspace to necessarily think about, developing sophisticated concepts. So many people studying, certainly in the strong Jewish communities on the East Coast, in Israel. So many people getting high-level Jewish education. Rabbis reaching far-flung communities around the world. Chabad is in all 50 states. There are people, there are rabbis reaching out to people in ways that we never dreamed, making that impact. Things seem very developed. On the other hand, you also have the people that feel like they've hit the glass ceiling and they can't break forward. And what happens then is they start turning to other things. They start forgetting about Judaism. Let's go out in the world, whether it's earning more money, more famous, more indulgent, more narcissistic, but we forget about our core. We forget about the Judaism, we go away from it. And then what happens is the Jews are sent into exile and the cycle repeats itself. Inquisition, crusades before that, pogroms, the Holocaust. We see this time and time again. Development can't go any further, looking elsewhere, and then we get sent away. Rabbi Simcha writes about this. Rabbi Simcha died in 1926. Listen to what he writes. He says, the Jewish world looks to Berlin like it's Jerusalem. In other words, Berlin was the center of Western civilization in Europe. Psychology, arts, music, medicine. It's all developed, all very sophisticated there. That's the end-all, be-all. The Jews of the shtetl who felt they couldn't do anything more, and then the gates of the shtetl, their limitations were thrown open. And suddenly, they're able to go out there. Suddenly, they're able to make that difference out there in the world. They leave their Judaism, and they start going out there. And then, that's the Berlin that Rabbi Simcha is referring to. We look at Berlin as Jerusalem. That's the end-all, be-all, and we forget about our Judaism. And Rabbi Simcha says a wind is going to come out from Berlin that's going to destroy Eastern European Jewry. And unfortunately, even though he could not have dreamed it at the time, he died 7 years before Hitler took power. That's ultimately what happened. That's ultimately how things played out. So what do we do? We see this disturbing phenomenon. How do we break this phenomenon? As parents, we don't want our children to feel they can't outpace us because then they'll lose interest in their Judaism and that which is meaningful. How do we ensure that doesn't happen? There's a fascinating book called The Psychology of Tzimtzum by Mordechai Rottenberg. Mordechai Rottenberg writes, he says that there's something called the Oedipus complex that Freud believed in. And that was based on a mythological story that every boy as he grows up needs to eventually kill off his father and marry his mother. He needs to take over his father's position and assert himself by getting rid of his father. Not literally, but figuratively. And that's how the world goes. Mordechai Rottenberg says we have an answer that shows that we don't need to go that direction. See, very often, when you are very developed, whether it's in your field, whether it's in your personality, whether it's in Torah, whether it's as a Jew, your child looks up and says, I can't outpace you. I can't reach your level of scholarship. I can't reach your level of devotion. I can't reach your level of being a giving person or being a successful person or a wealthy person. I can't do it. So let me look elsewhere. And often they look at places that we don't want them to look at. We want them to stay within the confines of that which is good and meaningful and look there, not look out there. How do we keep them in there? See, Freud believed that you got to kill off your parent. We don't believe that. We see something very different. It says in the books of Kabbalah, the Arizal and Otras Chaim, the great Kabbalists teach us that when Hashem wanted to create the world, all there was God. There was godliness. That was it. Where's there room for a world? So what does God do? In very Kabbalistic jargon that we're not going to delve too deeply in, but the words are, he was mitzamtzim himself. He pulled himself back and he created a halal panoi, this empty space. In other words, there's a space where God was not there, godliness was not there. We have to know what that means. Again, we're not going into that, but those are the words. He pulled back, there was an empty space, and all that was left was a reshima, was a light imprint. In other words, there was space for a world, for good and evil, for free will. There was room for all of that to exist. And when it was able to exist, then a world came to be. But an imprint state. What that means is that we could pull back naturally when your child comes home from school and says, Daddy, Mommy, you won't believe what I learned. I learned about this concept of Torah, or I learned about multiplication or division or this. What's our reaction? Yeah, wait till you learn about fractions. Wait till you learn about wait till you learn about algebra or geometry or whatever it might be. We naturally feel like we need to show that we need more so we can assert respect so they can look to us. We might not even realize we're doing this, but we naturally respond in a way that shows we know that already, and maybe even we know more. Then the child's like, when they're young, they think Daddy's so amazing, Mommy's incredible. They get a little older, they're like, there's no room for me here. No room for me. Forget about this. But if I could pull back, and when my child comes home and says, you won't believe what I learned today. I learned the story about Abraham and Isaac, about Avram and Yitzchak, whatever it might be. And you say, yeah, tell me about it. Wow, that's so interesting. Why did he do that? Well, my teacher explained, wow, that's amazing. Thank you. I never thought of that. That's incredible. We could do this in so many different ways. We don't always have to say, yeah, I was there, and this is how I dealt with it. Listen to me, and this is how we overcome. We don't need to do that. We can just listen with fascination and say, wow, that's such an incredible idea. Thank you for teaching that to me. And they may say, come on, you knew this story. Yeah, but I never heard that twist on it. Your perspective is unique. You know what I'm doing? I'm creating an empty space where my child can exist. My child can exist, but now the concern many parents have is, well, wait a second. How do I know they're going to make the right decisions? How do I know they're going to stay loyal to my path? I'm teaching them about Torah and then I'm pulling myself back. How do I know they're going to stay loyal to Torah? How are they going to stay connected? How do I know all this? Maybe they'll go off the path. I need to stand there and be the big personality there that directs them, that guides them, that maybe even forces them, that pressures them. That's a mistake. You know why? Because when you pull back the reshima, the imprint is still there. That little impact is still there. In other words, your child knows who you are. And the more you give space for your child, the more your child will respect you. And the more the child will want to be with you. If you have a home that's happy, that's joyous, that's peaceful, that's committed and consistent to what's important, your child picks up on that, and that's where your child wants to be. Don't worry, when your child hits 18 or 20, they're going to leave, like they should. But in their mind, what do they want to create? That's what they want to create. They want to create that which they experience in your house. They want to have a house just like yours. One of the greatest compliments a teacher or one of my children gave me was the teacher said, you might not realize it, but your child talks a lot about you and your home, and your child even wants to be like you. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. I love that. You mean I don't have to say, be like me, do like me, don't do that, go this way? I don't have to say any of that. Just pull back. Tzimtzum. That's the message of Tzimtzum. We don't need an Oedipus complex. We don't need to kill off the previous generation. Tzimtzum. Hold back. Leave space for the child to thrive, to develop their own uniqueness, maybe even along your path, hopefully along your path. And don't worry, your imprint's there. You create that empty space that's happy, that's joyous, that's peaceful, that's consistent, that's meaningful. Your child will follow your path. And if we do that, we don't need to continue that path of development, exile. We don't need to go that path. We don't need that. Because right here, there are glass ceilings that can be broken. If I don't leave room for my child, then there's a ceiling above, there's a roof that can't be broken, then the child goes to a different home. But if I don't do that, if I say the ceiling is still here, it's for you to be broken because it's not about me, it's about you. And I'm appreciating your specialness and your brilliance and your sensitivity and your creativity, the child stays right there and breaks through that ceiling right over here. So may we take this message, and we're at a time right now, we're all at home. We hope to be starting minyanim soon. We might have a minyan tonight. We hope to have it soon. But we're all home. We're all home, and therefore we all get in each other's way, and it can be stressful. And even the people who are laughing about it are not fully laughing about it. Now's a perfect time to hold back and listen in fascination to the insights of your children. Let them talk. Let them teach you. And you know what? So often they teach us things we never considered, we never thought of. And even if it's everything you thought of, just be fascinated, be engaged, be interested. And then the child will want to stay right where they are and grow and develop along the imprint that you left. You don't want them to be mini yous. You don't want them to be a clone of you, but you want them to have your value system. You want them to have your character. You want them to have the goodness that you exude. And they will do that if you're able to pull back. Have a wonderful Shabbos. I hope to see all of you soon. Please come visit. The last couple of weeks on Shabbos afternoon, people have come to visit. We've sat outside. We've studied. We've talked. It's been amazing. Please come visit. We'd love to see you. Stay well. I love each of you, and I hope to see you soon.